Screen 1 tomorrow night.
There's something I should tell you. I'm getting married.
Oh, don't you see? Nothing you can say can make it better. I don't want to hear it.
I think you forgot something.
Out of control, Michael. But I've never felt so alive.
Who is he? Do you really know about him?
She's going to be my wife. Tell me that you love me.
Tomorrow night.
Tell me.
On BBC One.
If you care what you watch and what you read, get the Radio Times. In search of a dream girl or two, Charlie Drake returns to the screen. In Town and On Woman's Hour, Liza Minnelli. And youngish, but still dangerous, Rick Mayall and Ade Edmondson in a rather brilliant new comedy, Bottom. Yes, the boys are back.
Thunderbirds are go.
So the Radio Times investigates just how far some people will go to emulate their heroes.
Amazing.
The Radio Times is packed with all-channel information, and with the help of its easy-to-use program pages, you're sure to catch the best in TV and radio. The Radio Times. It's essential reading.
BBC Two's season of Japanese programmes continues shortly with Kyoto, My Mother's Place, made by one of Japan's most celebrated filmmakers, Nagisa Oshima, who reflects on his mother's life in the old capital. In just over 20 minutes here on BBC One, we'll see Dave McCauley climb into the ring to defend his world flyweight crown against his South African challenger, baby Jake Mutlala. First on BBC One at 9:25, here's the news with Martyn Lewis.
The Foreign Secretary warns that Europe is on the edge of disaster if the Yugoslav conflict continues. The presidents of Serbia and Croatia trade angry words at the start of the peace conference. Their countrymen ease back on the fighting, but the negotiators are told to take no comfort from that. Good evening. The European Community's Peace Conference, widely seen as the last chance to solve the Yugoslav crisis, opened today with a warning from its chairman, Lord Carrington, that there are considerable difficulties ahead. Just how considerable was demonstrated by an angry exchange between the two warring factions. Croatia's president accused Serbia of waging a dirty, undeclared war. Serbia's president said the Croatians were trying to install a totalitarian regime in violation of human rights. Britain's Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd warned it would be a disaster for Europe if the fighting in Croatia continued or got worse.
There are many hopes riding on this peace conference in The Hague, especially amongst the Croatians and ethnic Albanians from Kosovo who demonstrated outside the meeting. But the opening session hadn't lasted very long before the rival republics were at each other's throats. President Tudjman of Croatia spoke of the Serbians' dogmatic militarism and expansionist aims. In turn, President Milosevic of Serbia called the Croatians totalitarian chauvinists, guilty of ruthless discrimination against the Serbian minority in their republic.
By constant armed attacks on the territories inhabited by Serbs.
Lord Carrington said he had anticipated the two sides would set out their opening positions in the toughest terms.
You can look for common ground, and with a little ingenuity you can sometimes find some way forward. Whether you can or not remains to be seen. I don't think that it's going to be at all easy, but I don't think you ought to despair of doing so before you've even started.
The British Foreign Secretary emphasised that the stakes were very high.
I think Europe is on the edge of a disaster on this question of Yugoslavia, because I think it will be a disaster for Europe if the present fighting in Croatia continued or got worse.
After today's formal opening for the conference, the precarious process of detailed negotiation is expected to begin here next Thursday. At least today, all the participants did agree to work with Lord Carrington. At the moment, the Serbians don't want to be seen to be sabotaging the peace process any more than the Croatians. But reconciling their differences will still be an extraordinarily tough job. David Walter, BBC News, The Hague.
The Yugoslav president, Stipe Mesic, who is himself a Croat, has repeated his warning that he'll order the Yugoslav army to withdraw to its barracks. And if the order is not carried out, he'll consider this to be a coup. There was an early lull in today's fighting, but then sporadic battles broke out in eastern Croatia for control of the towns there and the motorway to Belgrade.
Serbian rebels held their position on the bridge. The battle for the motorway between Zagreb and Belgrade entered its third day, and Croats continued their attempts to open the road between the east and west of their republic. The main point of conflict was the village of Rajic, close to the motorway, bombarded yesterday and attacked again today. 2 assaults, amazingly, with a break for lunch. On the Croatian side, there were at least 3 dead and 7 injured. Serbian casualties not known. Peace conference or no peace conference, there's certainly no peace here and none in prospect. But Vukovar on the River Danube had its quietest day in 2 weeks. There is a lull, at least temporary, in some places. An elaborate system of bunkers and trenches has been built around the city of Osijek in preparation against the final onslaught that is expected. There, 2 of the defenders, in the absence of external danger, were playing catch with hand grenades. Martin Bell, BBC News, Osijek.
An opinion poll for tomorrow's Independent on Sunday suggests the Conservatives are maintaining a narrow lead over Labour. It's the 3rd survey within a week to put the Tories ahead. The poll, conducted yesterday and today by NOP, has the Conservatives on 41%, Labour on 39% and the Liberal Democrats on 15%. The latest Newsnight poll of polls, compiled between August the 23rd and September the 2nd, puts the Conservatives 1 point ahead of Labour, again on 41%. The Liberal Democrats remain on 15%.
For John Major on his way to Balmoral today, this latest poll will confirm his cautious approach to an autumn election. If the current trends were repeated on polling day, he'd risk losing his majority, and many advisers say he should wait till next year. Labour argues the Conservative lead in recent opinion polls is due to John Major's high international profile. They now plan to turn the spotlight back onto the economy.
When people return to looking at health, education, transport, the failure to invest in industry and training, and above all, the fastest rising unemployment anywhere in the Western world, they will not believe that the Conservatives, who've been in power for 12 years and created these problems, have any answers to them today.
But the Conservatives say Labour's on the slide.
I welcome concentration on the economic issues because people are sensible enough to look at the policies of the parties. And every poll that's been taken shows that they recognise that the Conservative Party is the more competent party at running an economy and that Labour can't be trusted to run a free enterprise economy.
The Liberal Democrats, whose conference opens tomorrow, say Mr Major should stop dithering over November.
He's got to stop keeping the country hanging about. It's bad for the economy, it's bad for our politics, and frankly, I think it's bad for him. He should put an end to the speculation and put an end to it quickly. Get ministers back behind their desks if there isn't going to be one, and get us bringing Britain out of the recession that he and his government caused.
But a survey of 100 Conservative MPs for tomorrow's Sunday Telegraph shows just 17 in favour of November. Inside the Conservative Party, at least, the Prime Minister's under little pressure to go for an early election.
The KGB was behind last month's coup attempt in the Soviet Union, according to the Russian President Boris Yeltsin. He said the organisation would now have to be completely restructured. Mr Yeltsin also spoke of the difficulties facing the country as it moves towards a more democratic system after decades of communist rule.
Mr Yeltsin's on the campaign trail at present, not so much at home as abroad. 5 journalists from Germany, Japan, Britain, France and Spain were invited to take part in an interview at which he could prove his democratic credentials. There were, he said, no isms now in Russia, and certainly not communism. The country was being, in his words, de-ideologized. You yourself have been a communist all your life. Your critics accused you during and after the coup attempt of behaving in an arbitrary manner. How easy is it to change the attitudes of this country?
It's difficult for a country and people who've lived, worked and been moulded by this system. For me, it's required a change in character and attitude. But if we want Russia to become democratic, we must overcome these difficulties.
The German correspondent asked what he'd do about the KGB.
The KGB will be completely restructured down to its very roots. I think one of the most important people in the coup was Khrushchev, the head of the KGB.
The correspondent from Spain sounded him out about his attitude to Mr. Gorbachev. In the past, Mr. Yeltsin said he'd support Mr. Gorbachev for the presidency of the overall union at the next election.
I think our good relations will continue while we're both presidents, provided he doesn't change. I think he's had so many lessons that he won't return to his former self.
Mr. Gorbachev says he wants the Swedish form of social democracy. I put that to Mr. Yeltsin.
What sort of model do you have? What would be the Yeltsin model?
I'm not a conservative and I'm not in the center. I'm rather to the left of center, in favor of social democracy. You don't have to have a prepared system. Maybe you can create something new.
It was a powerful performance and should enhance his reputation in the West. But it won't altogether satisfy his critics here, who claim Mr. Yeltsin is still too tempestuous and too impulsive. John Simpson, BBC News, Moscow.
Opposition parties in Azerbaijan are calling on people to boycott tomorrow's presidential election there. The opposition have pulled out of the election, describing it as unconstitutional. As a result, President Ayaz Mutalibov, accused of supporting last month's coup attempt, looks set to win.
Rallies by the alliance of opposition parties known as the Popular Front attracted thousands this week in the capital Baku, but Azerbaijan, the republic at the forefront of the nationalist movement in the USSR 2 years ago, now looks on in envy at the democracy and independence in the Baltic states. Tomorrow, the Republic's president, Ayaz Mutalibov, widely suspected of having enthusiastically supported last month's failed coup in Moscow, is all set to be re-elected unopposed. When Soviet troops put down a nationalist uprising in January 1990, killing at least 150 people, Mutalibov was the man Moscow brought in to maintain control. At opposition headquarters, they portray Lenin and Mutalibov as one and the same. But the Popular Front has withdrawn their candidate, the only other, claiming that tomorrow's election is unconstitutional.
After the election, we'll tell the people it wasn't democratic, and Mutalibov is not the constitutional president.
But the president is no longer a communist, said his spokesman today. He'd merely used the party in the past to achieve good. The opposition says that most people won't vote in tomorrow's election. But there are those who feel that President Mutalibov, communist or non-communist, is the kind of strongman Azerbaijan needs, especially in its continuing and occasionally bloody fight over disputed territory with Armenia. Mike Smart, BBC News, Baku.
Israel's Foreign Minister David Levy says he does not want a confrontation with America over loan guarantees. He was responding to suggestions that Middle East peace talks were being jeopardized by a threat to hold up aid for settling Soviet Jews. Mr. Levy said the United States was not hostile, and he added that harmful statements should be avoided. Lawyers representing Winston Silcott say forensic experts have confirmed that police notes used at his trial were neither complete nor contemporaneous. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of PC Keith Blakelock during a riot at the Broadwater Farm Estate in Tottenham. Eddie Bozio reports.
Essex police interviewed Winston Silcott in Gartree Prison last Wednesday. They'd been asked by the Home Secretary to investigate the case after independent tests carried out on police notes of Silcott's interrogation found that they'd been tampered with. The so-called ESDA test can reveal the order in which documents were written. It formed a key part in the successful appeal against conviction of the Birmingham Six. Winston Silcott was jailed for life with 2 other men for the murder of Police Constable Keith Blakelock in the riot on the Broadwater Farm Estate in 1985. The case of one of the other accused, Engin Raghip, is to be heard in the Court of Appeal at the end of next month. The case of Mark Braithwaite is also under Home Office review. Silcott's lawyers are understood to have been told that the tests carried out for the Essex police confirm the result of the earlier independent tests, undermining the only solid evidence against him, his apparent confession in a police cell. The report is expected to go to the Home Secretary within days, and he will then have to decide whether to refer the case to the Court of Appeal.
Detectives at Scotland Yard say they're becoming increasingly concerned for the safety of a 17-year-old girl who's been missing since Wednesday. Lynn Rogers from Catford in London hasn't been seen since she went to discuss a job with a man at Charing Cross Station. David Willis reports.
A week ago, Lynn Rogers received a telephone call offering her a secretarial job involving foreign travel. She arranged to meet the man who'd called at Charing Cross railway station last Wednesday. And since then, there's been no sign of her.
If Lynn sees or reads anything, that she will try and get in touch with us in some way. Or if anyone is holding her or anything like that, to let us know that she's all right, she's alive.
The man leading the police inquiry says Lynn recently applied to a large number of employment agencies, so many people had access to her telephone number.
There has been some speculation it's a murder inquiry. It's not at the moment. We're treating it as a major inquiry. We don't know what's happened to her.
Lynn has a pet horse, and it's said she would have arranged for it to be cared for had she planned to stay away from home.
Now with news of today's sport, here's David Davis.
Hampshire have won cricket's NatWest Trophy for the first time in the now almost traditional thrilling finish at Lord's. Put into bat, their opponents Surrey made 240 for 5, but Hampshire overtook them with 4 wickets and just 2 balls to spare.
David Gower, Hampshire's stand-in captain, put the favourite Surrey into bat, and despite this rare early moment of aggression from Alex Stewart, who made 61, it was a success. 68 for 1 after 30 overs was Surrey's halfway score, but as Graham Thorpe opened out in the second half of the innings on his way to 93, the run rate almost trebled. The final flourish came from David Ward, who made 43 once Stewart and Thorpe had gone, but 240 for 5 was never an intimidating total. Hampshire's initial reply was built around Tony Middleton in his first NatWest match. He made 74, but with 10 overs to go and Waka Younis back on, the required rate was 5.5 and over. Suddenly, a pedestrian match was alive. First, Robin Smith, already past 50, hit a shot that suggested the match was as good as finished. But then, almost immediately, David Gower was dismissed for 9, to be followed next over by James. Later, 17 balls to go, 23 to win, and a Jonathan Ayling 6 put Hampshire back in front. But then, in the same over, the dismissal of Smith bizarrely run out for 78. Advantage again to Surrey. Another run out followed in the last over, but Ayling's 4 in the dusk finally secured the result with 2 balls to spare. Hampshire's first NatWest Trophy, perhaps a last big occasion for David Gower.
A month into the English soccer season, Manchester United have extended their lead to 4 points at the top of the First Division. Liverpool are their nearest challengers and both won today. United scored 3 in 8 minutes against Norwich, exposing defensive frailties. Dennis Irwin got the first. The fans' celebrations were still continuing as 3 Norwich defenders failed to deter Mark Hughes, ideal for Brian McClare. United were rampant and soon Hughes was forcing another error from Norwich. United's newest star, Ryan Giggs, produced the perfect finish. For Liverpool at Notts County, substitute Ronnie Rosenthal scored once and earned a penalty after his side had been a goal down. Mark Walters made no mistake to ensure Liverpool the points. Elsewhere, Coventry's substitute, Peter de Louvu, with a second-half goal, prolonged Arsenal's poor start. Vaughan Ryan of Wimbledon scored twice as Luton were beaten before the smallest First Division crowd in history. So at the top of the table tonight, Manchester United and Liverpool are followed by Manchester City, who lost at Leeds. Chelsea drew 1-1 at West Ham and dropped to 5th. In Scotland, Ian Redford of St Johnstone scored the decisive goal as Aberdeen were surprisingly beaten at home. And Ian Baird scored one of Hearts' 2 goals that beat Motherwell. As a result, Hearts lead the Premier Division by a point from Rangers and Hibernian, who both won today. Aberdeen dropped to 4th place. Well, both England and Scotland continued their preparations for Rugby Union's World Cup today, but in contrasting style. The Scots were held to a draw by the Barbarians, while England scored 9 tries to crush the Soviet Union by 53 points to 0.
They came as the Soviet Union's team, but with the Union itself dissolved since their arrival, some seemed unsure whether to sing a national anthem which may never again be heard at a sporting international. For England, though, this match was only ever going to be a tune-up for the coming World Cup, and one which was to be set on an irreversible course from the moment Chris Oatey raced away for the opening try. Soon after, England were threatening to go on the rampage as Hill and Carling forged an opening for Guscott to grasp. Though the tries kept coming, England, perhaps lacking the incentive to raise their game against weakening opposition, didn't fully assert their authority till late in the game. Rob Andrews scoring his first try on home soil to round off victory by 53 points to 0. At Murrayfield, Scotland's indifferent World Cup preparations continued. They had to come from behind against the Barbarians. Gavin Hastings charging down Berbisier's clearance for Finlay Calder to score their vital second try. The result, 16-all.
Monica Seles has won the women's singles at the US Tennis Championships, beating Martina Navratilova in straight sets. Meanwhile, 39-year-old Jimmy Connors is on court in his semi-final against Jim Courier. He was in fighting form from the start, coming from break point down to hold both his opening service games. But a setback in his third, Connors, under increasing pressure from his younger opponent, eventually hitting an approach shot too long. First set, Courier, 6-3.
And that's the BBC News Tonight. Good night.
A very good evening to you. High pressure is dominating the weather, likely to do so over the next few days, so the weather staying fairly quiet for most of us. A lot of sunshine around, 10 to 12 hours of it for many places today. But as you can see from the satellite pictures, some cloud around, some particularly coming down into northern, some central parts of Scotland. Cloud clipping into the part of East Anglia and part of southeast England, but that's beginning to melt away now. So a lot of clear weather around, some mist and fog patches too. And although it's not going to be as cold a night as last night, still going to be a bit on the cold side, and from the East Wales northwards there could well be a touch of ground frost. Now these are the temperatures 3 or 4 feet above the ground, and the lowest ones probably in East Wales, the western part of the Midlands. Tomorrow then, a lot of sunshine over England, Wales, Northern Ireland, right up into southern parts of Scotland, up to Glasgow area. Perhaps a bit of cloud at times just clipping into that southeast coast, Kent really, rather than anywhere else. And a lot of cloud further north over northern parts of Scotland, central Scotland, spilling its way down into the southeast, perhaps into northeastern parts of England too, and giving the odd spot or two of drizzle in that far northeastern part. But in the Western Isles, brightening up later on during the day with a bit of sunshine there. If anything, it's going to be a little bit warmer than today. Top temperatures 24 Celsius. Sea breeze is keeping it rather cool along the coast. And that's it.
Next Saturday on One finds Anneka at 5:45 with a K9 challenge in Northern Ireland. Then join Bruce at 6:35 for the contest that guarantees you a cuddly toy. At 7:30, it seems Sharon's already found hers.
I hope she plays it cool. The last thing you should do is show a man you're desperate.
Tell that to the plumber you wouldn't let out of your utility room last week.
In the house of ELIOTT at 8, Beatrice and Evangeline entertaining a new neighbour and an unwelcome visitor.
Why have you come here, Mrs. Pierce?
Your half-brother, 24 years old. He's entitled to something, isn't he? That's the law.
It's the Albert Hall's biggest end-of-show party at 8:55 as conductor Andrew Davis, the BBC Symphony Orchestra and a capacity crowd end the 1991 proms season with a flourish. Take a front row seat next Saturday night on One.
There's intrigue and tension in store in an hour in Bestseller, starring Brian Dennehy as a cop-turned-author who's commissioned to write the life story of a violent criminal. Before that, on BBC One, we go World Championship Boxing. Dave McCauley defends his title against baby Jake Matlala from South Africa. Our commentator at the ringside is Harry Carpenter.
and good evening from Belfast, where tonight Dave Boy Macaulay can make modern British boxing history. If he can successfully defend his world flyweight title tonight for the 5th consecutive time, he'll be the first Briton to do so. The man who stands in his way is a little man from South Africa, and he's known as Baby Jake Matlala.